plunging to your death from a roller coaster. It was the 28th of August 1999 in New Jersey. 39-year-old Kimberly Bailey was at Jillian's Wonderland Pier with her 8-year-old daughter Jessica. The mum and daughter were visiting from Pomona in New York. Now, the pair had decided to spend their Saturday night spending some time together and enjoying the rides. They were looking forward to going on the Wild Wonder roller coaster, and they had no idea it would be their last. Now, they boarded the roller coaster, but little did they know that the ride had malfunctioned. After making its way up to the highest point of the ride, it then slipped and fell 30 feet backwards. As it accelerated down the hill, it smashed straight into another car. Now, this carriage was being loaded for the next ride. The mother and daughter were tragically sent flying to their deaths. The 2 people in the second car were also injured. It turned out to be a mechanical failure that led to the horrific accident. A flying cow. That is genuinely what happened to a man in India. It was April 2023 and Shivdayal Sharma was an 82-year-old pensioner. He was in Alwar, India, near to a train station. He needed the toilet, but there didn't seem to be any nearby. He decided to find a somewhat secluded spot in order to relieve himself. Little did he know a cow had wandered onto the train tracks. In a case of extremely unfortunate timing, a train happened to be hurtling down the tracks at that exact minute. Now, the trains there typically reach speeds of 100 miles an hour. Therefore, there was absolutely no chance that this cow would be able to jump out of the way in time. The cow was struck by the oncoming vehicle. The cow was actually launched 30 meters into the air because it was hit with such force. The cow flew through the air and right into the path of the urinating pensioner. The force that the cow hit him with was so intense that it killed him instantly. This is what the train looked like after the incident. Another pedestrian was also inches away from being hit by the cow too.
Deaths caught on audio, and this is a massive trigger warning. What you're about to see and hear is a simulation of what happened to Alaskan Flight 261, following a catastrophic loss in pitch control, killing all 88 people on board. This is real audio footage from the plane going down between air traffic controllers and the pilots. The plane went completely inverted, meaning it was flying upside down, and just listen to how calm the pilots are. This is absolutely disturbing, and can you imagine being a passenger on this flight while the plane is completely inverted?
Story unfolding in Arizona right now. So on the morning of May 22nd, 46-year-old Hope Tucker and her adult son were driving on Interstate 10 in Buckeye when their car broke down. It's important to note that Hope's son is autistic and mostly nonverbal. They broke down between Verrado Way and Watson Road. Police believe that Hope, her son, and their dog got out and started walking on foot to either find shade or help, but they ended up disappearing. Their car was found that day and towed away by the Department of Public Safety. 2 days later, her son was found extremely dehydrated at a gas station on Watson Road, just a few miles away from where their car broke down. He was then hospitalized for an entire month before being reunited with his grandpa. But during his month-long hospital stay, he never once mentioned that his mom was missing or still out there somewhere in the desert. It wasn't until he was with his grandpa on June 22nd, exactly 1 month later, that he told his grandpa what happened, and his grandpa then called the police. Because her son is mostly nonverbal, police brought in a specialized forensic interviewer to get as much information from him as they could to help find his mom. He ended up telling police that his mom passed away the same day that their car broke down. He said that after After they were walking for a while, Hope laid down to rest, closed her eyes, and just stopped breathing. So Buckeye police started looking for her that day. They brought in tracking dogs, drones, and ATVs to search for her, but at this point, things weren't looking good because they were already a month behind. But after a 2-week search, authorities found the remains of Hope and her dog just this past Monday. They found her just outside of the Sienna Hills community near Verrado Way and Thomas Road. Where she was found was less than 2 miles from Interstate 10. At this point, police say they don't suspect foul play as her body showed no obvious signs of trauma, and her cause of death has yet to be determined. The area where they broke down is in the middle of the desert, really undeveloped, and has some pretty steep hills. It was also close to 100 degrees the day she went missing. The story is so heartbreaking, and I truly can't imagine what they both went through out there all alone.
Arrested and charged with pimping out their adopted sons to a pedophile ring and producing CP with them. This is William and Zachary Zulock. William was a government worker and Zachary was a banker. In 2018, they adopted 2 young boys. And some of their social media posts are absolutely chilling. Happy #gotcha day. That's what they wrote when they adopted their sons. There's also this post from Zach's Instagram, my partner in crime for life. But apparently what was going on behind closed doors in this household was beyond disturbing. According to multiple people, William and Zachary invited other pedophiles over to their house to take part in the abuse of their adopted sons. The 2 men also filmed these abuses and shared them widely on the dark web. Apparently, one of the men who was invited over to the house shared some disturbing messages with investigators. He said that Zachary sent him Snapchat messages. I'm going to read one to you, including one that said, "I'm going to F my son tonight, stand by." And then afterwards, he sent images of him abusing the 11-year-old child. Eventually, though, after it was found that these 2 were downloading CP or CSAM images and videos to their home computers, the authorities got a search warrant and performed a raid. During the raid, William tried to fight back and was pulled out of his house completely naked by the police. And what they found in the home was absolutely disturbing. A cache of CP or CSAM materials, and 2 young boys who would forever be haunted by the horrific things their adopted parents did to them. I don't know what happened to these 2, I don't know if the trials happened yet, but it was stated that they were facing up to 9 life sentences for some of these horrific things that they did to those kids. And I'm hoping that at least one of those 9 life sentences sticks. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
Worst work accidents ever, and whatever you do, never look up the video. The video that I'm about to explain to you has left many people traumatized, so whatever you do, don't go looking for it. The video is pretty short, coming in at 52 seconds in length, and it's not known where in Russia this took place. And it's a mystery to how this footage made its way onto the internet. As you play the video, you see a man walk towards the lathe machine, which he assumes is off. The man is wearing baggy clothes and some kind of jacket, and wearing loose clothing around a lathe machine is a no-no, since it can be sucked up into the machine, as this man found out. After the man approaches the machine, he seems to reach over it, but the rotating pole seems to get stuck on one of his sleeves, and it then drags the man into the machine. Initially, it doesn't kill the man, instead it traps his arm around the rotating pole and the machine appears to have stopped. But after a couple seconds, the machine seems to start again, and this time dragging the poor man's entire body into the machine, rotating it around and around and around. As his limbs hit the ground after each rotation, you see red mist appear, and after a few more seconds, chunks of flesh and body parts start to fly off the machine. A man then walks into the shot and he sees what's happening to his coworker. And with a look of shock, he quickly turns off the machine, but it was too late. His coworker's body has been completely torn apart into multiple pieces, and the machine is a bloody mess. There are a collection of still images from the aftermath of the incident which shows how unrecognizable the man's body is. In one photo, you see what appears to be a tibia with no flesh around it lying on the ground. And in another photo, you see the victim's severed and crushed head underneath the machine. It's absolutely disturbing and awful to look at. This video is hard to explain and hard to watch. It's extremely gruesome and disturbing, and I really don't recommend looking for it.
Takes catfishing to a whole other level. Curtis Engerland was a retired 74-year-old, but he was still extremely active. He was a lot fitter than people half his age, regularly taking part in CrossFit and hikes. He lived in Grays Harbor County and was devastated when his long-term partner passed away in 2021. He loved companionship and really missed that element of his life. He joined some dating sites and met a man named Philip Brewer, aged 32. Despite the age gap, they seemed to have a lot in common and got on really well. On the 13th of January, they went for a coffee and then a hike. They went back to his house and watched a film. However, when Curtis woke the next day, he had a shock. Philip had gone and taken with him Curtis's wallet, phone, and his keys. Curtis also realised money had been taken from his bank account. He reported this to police, but things would take an even more sinister turn. Curtis was reported missing on the 24th of February after family and friends didn't hear of him for a while. They'd also received odd texts from his phone, but the texts didn't sound like they were off Curtis. The text came in the middle of the night telling them to expect him to be away for 3 to 6 weeks. Police started using GPS and phone records to try and track down the missing pensioner. On the 7th of March, there was a horrific discovery. Curtis's remains were found 110 miles away from his home. Officers then found a woman called Christine Hardy, aged 47, at Curtis's house, along with Philip that Curtis had met on that website. Now, they insisted to police that they were just renting the property off Curtis and they had no idea where he'd gone. That, however, was a lie. A witness provided information to authorities. They had reason to believe that Philip and Christina had crept into Curtis's house in the middle of the night. They injected him in the neck with a fatal dose of the substance F. Now, horrifically, when they transported Curtis to the dump site where they buried his remains, they realised he was still alive. They plunged a knife into his neck, killing him. They've been arrested and are charged with murder, kidnap and theft. They are currently awaiting trial.
Scariest games to play in real life, so whatever you do, never play this game. The game is called Baby Blue, and to play the game, you have to go into a bathroom on your own, turn off the lights and then lock the door. Then you stare into the mirror and hold your arms out like you're rocking a baby, and repeat the words Baby Blue, 13 times without making a mistake. If you do this right, you will suddenly feel the weight of an invisible baby in your arms. The baby will get heavier and heavier as it grows larger and larger. You will also feel it scratching your arms pretty deep. Before it gets too heavy, you have to quickly take the invisible baby, flush it down the toilet, and run out of the bathroom. If you don't do it fast enough, a hideous woman will appear in the mirror. She will then yell, "Give me back my baby," and scream so loud that it will break the glass. And if you are still holding the baby, she will kill you. Some people believe the woman is Bloody Mary and she murdered her own child when she shattered a mirror and used a piece of broken glass to stab it to death. According to an urban legend, a group of girls found out about the game Baby Blue and decided to try it out. They didn't believe it would work, so they sent their friend Laura into the bathroom on her own. She turned the lights off and closed the door behind her. Laura then put out her hands and began saying the phrase Baby Blue, Baby Blue. All of a sudden, a baby appeared in her arms and began scratching her. Laura was scared out of her mind and had no idea what to do. She wanted to drop it and run, but she was afraid of what might happen. She just stood there holding the invisible baby as it grew heavier and heavier. And suddenly she saw something in the bathroom mirror that terrified her. When Laura's friends heard her screaming, they tried to open the bathroom door, but it was locked. When they finally opened the door, they found Laura lying on the ground dead. Her eyes had been scratched out, and they couldn't move her because something large and invisible was pinning her to the ground. Now, I don't know how true this is, it is just an urban legend story, but still, it's absolutely terrifying because it's associated with the game Baby Blue. I don't think I'll ever play this game because it sounds extremely terrifying even if it is fake, but nonetheless, if you ever decide to play this game, let me know how it goes.
Phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Me. These are the Skelton brothers, aged 5, 7, and 9 years old, and they haven't been seen since 2010. Now, the three Skelton brothers were innocent young boys from Michigan, and after Thanksgiving in 2010, like I said, they vanished off the face of the earth. Before they went missing, the boys were in the custody of their estranged father. His name was John Skelton, and to this day, almost 15 years later, he has never revealed exactly what happened to his sons. But there is a somewhat disturbing twist to this case. Now, all three of these boys vanished. That means that their bodies were never found, which means that murder charges technically can't be sought. It's almost like they just disappeared into thin air. Well, their father, John, has changed his story a number of times, but throughout all the stories he's told, one thing has remained the same. He has told authorities time and time again that he gave his children to people. Now, at first he said he gave his kids to a woman that he met on the side of the road. Then he told the police that he gave his 3 sons to an underground group that was going to keep them safe. And eventually he told authorities that he gave his kids to 2 women and a man who were going to take his boys to a farm to give them a better life. Now, something really suspicious about all of this is the fact that every time his story has been he gave his kids to somebody. And to this day, their remains have never been found. No one has any idea what happened to them. But what I do know is that every single year, millions of children are kidnapped or forced into sex slavery. And a lot of the stories of how they got there sound similar to this. I'm not making any allegations here. I just want these 3 boys to be found one day. By the way, these are the aged photos showing what they would look like around nowadays. But eventually, John was charged with unlawful imprisonment, and he was sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison, which means that he'll be getting out of prison next year. He will be out walking as a free man, and this is the only guy who knows what happened to his sons. And there are a lot of weird things about this guy, like his cell phone records, where he turned off his phone and didn't want to be tracked on the night of the kid's disappearance. And I just want to know the truth about what happened. Join me on my journey to expose pedophile rings and corruption by listening to my podcast, The Conspiracy Files. It's available now on all streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Jeffrey Epstein's staff reveal some dark and troubling secrets. David Copperfield, the world-famous magician, was recently accused by 16 women of misconduct. And some of these women claim that he had relations with them or groomed them when they were minors. And you know who used to be good friends? Jeffrey Epstein and David Copperfield. So when Epstein was arrested in 2019 and took his life, this was over a decade after he had been previously arrested and investigated for crimes against children in Florida. And in that case, the authorities just slapped him on the wrist and said, "Don't do it again, we're going to let you go." But of course, he did it again. But the reason why I'm saying this is because these notes with David Copperfield come from 2005. And it's known by authorities and has been confirmed by authorities that Epstein was trafficking and assaulting young girls at that time. So now we get to the notes. These are handwritten notes that the staff jotted down at Epstein's Palm Beach mansion. And as you can see on these 2 specific notes, both in January of 2005, David Copperfield frantically called Epstein's house. In this one note, it said, "Magic David called." And in this note, it's a really strange one. Obviously, you can see David Copperfield called, but his only message was, "It's jackpot." That's never been explained. There are also instances from Epstein's Black Book that connect him and David Copperfield. And during this time period of just a few months, David Copperfield actually called Jeffrey Epstein's home 16 times. Victims have also come forward and claimed they saw David Copperfield performing magic tricks at one of Epstein's dinners. And they also claimed that there were 3 different instances when victims actually saw David and Epstein interacting. 3 different times. But David Copperfield's legal team says he and Epstein weren't friends. His legal team claims that any messages left for Epstein were in regards to some show tickets to come see David Copperfield in Vegas. But personally, I don't just pick up the phone and call people I'm not friends with 16 times in a couple of months and leave messages for them like it's jackpot. I also don't do magic tricks at dinner parties hosted by people that aren't my friends. And in this case, I'm going to choose to believe the victims as opposed to a liar like David Copperfield, who has already spent his entire career deceiving the audience into believing what he wants them to believe. So why wouldn't he practice those same techniques now? If you want to hear my whole rundown of the Epstein case, go listen to the first episode of my podcast, The Conspiracy Files. It's available now on all streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and it's very thorough.
This car for 2 months. In Sweden, there is a city called Umeå, and surrounding it are deep forests, and a popular hobby people have living here is snowmobiling. In 2012, at the end of February, a man was on his snowmobile riding on one of the many trails in the forest when he suddenly noticed a massive snow pile a little off the trail. He had his helmet on and his visor down, so he couldn't quite make out what the snow pile was. But as he got closer, he realized it was a car buried underneath the snow. The snow was all the way up to the roof, and there was 3 feet of snow on the roof of the car. The windows were completely iced up, so it was definitely there for some time. The man then parked his snowmobile and started walking through the waist-deep snow towards the car. Once there, he began to scrape some of the ice off the windows. When there was a big enough hole for him to see inside, he peered inside the car, and all over the interior he could see ice caked up against the glass, the dashboard, literally everything inside the car. There was also food wrappers and garbage all over the seats and floor. Then, all of a sudden, something moved in the back seat. The man was then shocked to see someone lying in the back seat in a sleeping bag staring back at him through the icy window. He then called emergency services and they quickly arrived on the scene and pulled a bony man from the car who could barely move or speak. As they got him out of the car, he was so weak he could barely even communicate with them, but he would manage to get out the words, "Haven't eaten and stuck here since December 19th. But that wouldn't have made sense because the day he was found was February 20th, and that means he would have been stuck in the car for over 2 months. And for some of that time, the temperature outside was as low as negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit. At first, this seemed just impossible, but as the man recovered in the hospital and was given fluids and food, he was able to recall what happened. Apparently, back in December, he was driving around the forest trail and accidentally went too far and got his car trapped in the snow. And rather than walk out of the forest and try and find someone to help, he decided to just stay in his car. At first, he used the car's heater to stay warm, but eventually he ran out of gasoline. But by that point, the car was covered in enough snow that it kind of formed an igloo around the car. He also had warm enough clothes and a sleeping bag that was able to keep him warm enough to survive. Additionally, he had some snacks that he brought, but those ran out quickly, so he had to survive off melted snow for water ever since. By the time he was found by the snowmobiler, he was extremely malnourished and succumbing to hypothermia, meaning if he was found any later, he would have been dead. During those 2 months, he had lost 50 pounds, but he would make a full recovery in the hospital. There are also many pictures of the inside and outside of the car, as you can see on your screen right now.
Helped to solve the murder of a teenager who was shot in Merseyside. On the 7th of April 2020 in Sefton, Merseyside, a distress call came into the police. It was the younger brother of 20-year-old Mikey Rainsford. He stated, "My brother's just been shot." He then explains that we don't even know if we're safe and can be heard shouting, "Mike, wake up." Mikey's brother Josh and his dad had been watching TV. Mikey returned home that night at about 11 p.m. Mikey then asked his dad for a lift to his girlfriend's house and his dad agreed. His dad watched and waited as Mikey packed a bag of snacks from the kitchen. Suddenly, the pair were startled by 2 loud bangs. These turned out to be gunshots through the window, and Mikey quickly fell backwards. It became apparent that Mikey had been shot. His dad started chest compressions while Josh rang 999. Soon, armed police entered the house, and Mikey was taken to hospital, but tragically was pronounced dead shortly after. Within hours, rumours were circulating on social media that Pip and Worm were responsible. These were nicknames of the Foy brothers, Michael and James. They were known to be involved in gangs and substances. Now, 53 minutes prior to Mikey's killing, a police officer was in the local area and noticed 2 people on a scrambler bike. Suspecting that this meant trouble, the officer called for backup, but she then noticed a house with a broken window. This was the house of the Foy brothers and their mum Joyce. It transpired that somebody had thrown bricks through the window, and one brick had narrowly missed Joyce's head. Police started to collect CCTV evidence of the bike that had been spotted in the area, and they found the bike on CCTV around the same area and time of Mikey's killing. Police then got a search warrant for the Foy's property and found nothing. Strangely, James, Michael and mother Joyce all apparently lost their phones the day after the murder. Despite this, police were able to use mobile phone data to pinpoint the brothers' movements on the night. A Snapchat video was uncovered featuring an electric bike similar to the ones that the brothers owned from an account linked to James. This was the Snapchat image with the following text. Minutes later, Mikey was killed. There was no evidence that the bricks through the window had anything to do with Mikey Rainsford. By all accounts, he never got involved in any gangs or trouble or substances. The Foy brothers' mum was charged with perverting the course of justice. She was accused of disposing of her SIM card and was jailed for 2.5 years. Michael Foy was found guilty of murder and got life in prison with a minimum of 30 years. James was found guilty of murder and possession of a firearm and got a minimum of 28 years. Their uncle Craig Johnson and a neighbour were found guilty of perverting the course of justice after getting involved in the aftermath.
Stephanie Wazilishin was murdered at the hands of her boyfriend, Russell Peterson. Her death was ruled a homicide classified as violent, and Russell was listed as the only suspect. But here we are, 31 years later, and he's never been arrested. I had the honor of talking with Stephanie's daughter, Nikki, who's here on TikTok, and it's important that you all listen to what she has to say.
What I want the world to know about my mom is that she was a very unhappy, neglected woman that got trapped in a domestic violence situation because she got pregnant, had the man's child, and kind of got stuck. You can relate to that. Any woman that's been in a shitty relationship and has a child can relate to the fact that you get stuck. Women are 70 times more likely to be killed within the first 2 weeks of leaving a relationship than any other time while in the relationship. I want the world to know that my mom talked to my dad at 8:07 on July 8th, 1993, and she made plans to leave Russell Bennett Peterson, and 5 hours later, she was pronounced dead. My dad has had the same story for 30 years. She was coming back to him, and my dad's life was just shattered. Our lives were shattered, and we're still picking up the pieces 30 years later. That's why I want the world to know that she was robbed of a whole new life that she could have had with my dad, who was really the love of her life originally. She was going back to him. That's what I want the world to know.
On July 9th, 1993, Russell claims that he got off work a little after 11 p.m. and went home to the house that he shared with Stephanie that sits on Coffee Pot Drive in Sedona, Arizona. Russell was a chef, and they also shared the home with Stephanie's daughters, Nikki, who was 10 at the time, and her little sister, who was 3. Russell claims that after getting home, he got in the shower and shared a bottle of wine with Stephanie, but their conversation would get heated after Stephanie mentioned that she had been on the phone with Nikki's dad for a while before he got home. The conversation then shifted to how Russell was about to leave to New York for 2 weeks after being accepted into Cornell for a culinary program. Russell states that an argument broke out, which made Stephanie go into their bedroom, pull out a gun, which was a Ruger Red Hawk .44 Magnum revolver, and return back into the living room. Russell says Stephanie cocked the gun and said, "I'm going to shoot you," and then fired the gun, which missed him, putting a bullet into the living room wall. He then states that Stephanie went into their bedroom with the gun, with him following her close behind. And then a struggle ensued, which resulted in the gun going off, shooting Stephanie in the neck, killing her. I want to be clear that this is all based on what Russell has said, because the only other person that truly knows what happened is no longer alive to tell the story.
My first impression of that night of waking back up was flashlights in my face. That's the first thing I remember, is lights in my face and telling me to get up, get dressed. Your mom and Russell got into a fight. They never told me that my mom was dead, even though they knew it. They told me that my mom had gotten into a fight. They told me to get dressed. And then they escorted me from my home, trying to block me from what I was seeing in the living room. But right where I said goodnight to my mom on the couch, like I had come up behind her, I gave her a hug and went to bed. Now it sits Russell Bennett Peterson there, and he's got his hands up and he's got blood on them. I remember seeing blood, and he's rocking and he's talking really fast. And that's the last thing I remember, because it was 10 seconds it took to escort me through and to get me to the cop car. That was the last time I was in my home.
It would take Russell about 30 minutes before calling the police, which he eventually did at 1:40 that morning, and the 911 call is infuriating.
911, what's your emergency?
I need help.
What kind of help, sir?
There has been a very bad accident. Me and my wife, we were in an argument, and she's hurt. She's hurt very bad. I need help.
Okay, what's wrong with her?
She's been shot.
She was shot?
Yes.
Who shot her?
We were... I don't know who.
You don't know who shot her?
She might have shot herself.
Were you close together, far apart? No, we were not far apart. We were close together. I can't give you exacts on that. It all happened so fast, I don't know. I mean, we were there was a struggle. Next thing I know, there was a pop and she dropped.
He changed his story multiple times and wouldn't tell authorities if Stephanie pulled the trigger or if he did. But when he told the story, it was never once the same. When Sedona PD arrived 3 minutes later, Stephanie was already dead. But there are so many pieces in this case that were completely mishandled and looked over by authorities. For starters, according to the autopsy, gunpowder residue was found on Stephanie's left palm, and she was right-hand dominant. According to the pathologist, after examining the neck wound, they found that it was considered a contact wound, and the presence of gunpowder residue on her left hand is consistent with her hands being up in a defensive posture. The location of the wound and gunpowder residue indicated that this was not self-inflicted or even accidental. What it does indicate is that Stephanie was murdered at the hands of Russell Peterson. Russell was listed as a suspect after police found out that he tampered with the crime scene. After Stephanie was shot, he decided to pick up the gun, put it in the holster, and put it back in their closet. But then he decided to put it back on the ground. When asked about this, he said that he did it because he didn't want to be accused of murder. It kind of makes you question what innocent person would say that. Russell also let their 3-year-old daughter run around her mom's body, and you can even hear her in the background of the 911 call. She was literally trying to put her mom's blood back inside of her. When police arrived that night, they found Russell and their 3-year-old sitting on the bed in front of Stephanie Stephanie's body. She kept saying, "That's my mommy." When they interviewed her, what she had to say was shocking.
They'll put me in the police squad car out front where I'll find my little sister, and she'll have a little stuffed toy, and she'll keep saying, "Poppy killed mommy, Poppy killed mommy, Poppy killed mommy." And she's saying it really excited, and I don't understand why she's saying it, because the police have just told me that Mom and Russell got into a fight. She went to Aunt Kay's house, which was a friend of hers at the time. Totally believe it. I'm 10, I'm naive, but my little sister's telling me Poppy killed mommy, and while we're in the car, I'm trying to convince her that's not what happened. The authorities just told me this. Like, I'm trying to reason with my 3-year-old sister that she's not dead, even though she knows that she is.
Russell tried to play off what she said by saying that she dreamt it all, and what she witnessed couldn't possibly be reliable because she was so young. Nikki, on the other hand, was woken up that night by flashlights in her face from police, who then put her sister, and Russell all in the back of a cop car together, which is extremely unethical considering he just killed their mom minutes prior. Sedona PD never even tested Russell's hands for gunpowder residue either, which is insane. Russell was only interviewed a handful of times because he literally canceled his appointments with the police. He was not cooperative with authorities, and he even went on to change his phone number in the middle of the investigation. Another major mistake made by Sedona PD was the fact that they never personally obtained Russell's phone records from that night. They waited until he brought them in months later, and what they would find is pretty black and white to me. Phone records show that right after Stephanie was murdered, Russell called his dad first, and that phone call lasted for a minute. What they talked about is unknown. It would then take Russell another 4 minutes to call the police. This unfortunately would never be investigated by Sedona PD until Nikki brought it up to them in 2023, 30 years later. But at this point, Russell's dad was already deceased. Now, the biggest question to me is, why did he call his dad first, and what did they talk about? You would think that with all of this evidence, the manner of death being labeled a homicide, with Stephanie's hands being put up to protect herself, and with Russell being labeled a suspect, that he would be charged with her murder. But no. On 2 separate occasions, this case was presented to the Yavapai County Attorney's Office, but prosecutors refused to file any charges, and they say that this is because of insufficient evidence. What's insane is that investigators even simulated the shooting with a model of the gun used. They had a woman with a similar frame and size as Stephanie attempt the same angle as the bullet's entry, and they concluded that this would have been incredibly difficult and unlikely for her to be able to shoot herself. She had never even shot a gun before. The two were together for 6 years, and their relationship was described as very tumultuous. Stephanie told her family more than 50 times that he was physically abusive to her, and that night she had plans to leave him and reconnect with Nikki's dad, who was her true love. It's not a coincidence that she ended up dead that night. Stephanie had a bruise on her arm, and the necklace that she was wearing that night had been ripped from her neck, further proving that this was a domestic violence incident that turned fatal. Just a year after Stephanie's murder, Russell remarried to a woman named Diane, and they quickly divorced after just a year of marriage. Diane would go on to say that Russell admitted to her that he did in fact kill Stephanie and confessed to the entire thing. He also confessed to washing his clothes and showering before calling the police that night. Unfortunately, Sedona PD didn't interview Nikki until last year, and when Nikki told them about Russell's confession, they said it was hearsay and nothing ever came of it. At this point, it's not known if they ever even interviewed Diane. Nikki became involved in her mom's murder 28 years later to try and get answers for herself, and she now has an entire TikTok page dedicated to this. Sadly, Sedona PD wrote her a letter last year basically stating that without Russell outright confessing, there isn't much they can do. But Russell refuses to interview with them or anyone for that matter, and Sedona PD says that they can't make him speak, even though he is the only suspect. This unfortunately has left her case frozen in time. One thing is for sure though, and that is that Stephanie never would have shot herself, and here's why.
And I want to point out something, that if his story is correct, that means that my mother took the gun, pointing at him in the living room, to shoot a gun towards my bed, like a gunshot towards my room. My mother would never do that. Are you kidding? That's risking my life. It's just asinine. He did that to cover up. Oh my God, there's 2 things. Sign the petition. We've got a petition going. It's got like 7,000 signatures on to present a complete case file investigation to a grand jury, a jury of our peers, figure out if there's enough evidence to prosecute. That's all I'm asking. Present what we got to a grand jury. So that's what the petition is for. First of all, Russell, you were going to know it was always going to be me that was going to come for you. It was never going to be Wendy. You mind fucked your own kid. It was never going to be your own kid. It was always going to be me. And you always knew that. That's why you kind of always stalked me throughout your life to see what I was doing. That being said, I am never going to stop coming for you. It has been 28 years. I thought the police were going to do something. I held firm that the police were going to come and get you because of what you did. They are not. I will spend the rest of my life speaking publicly on the fact that you murdered my mother, and every piece of evidence I have gathered in the last 2 years will be publicly presented in a documentary and probably many more. By this time next year, I plan on speaking publicly to Nancy Grace. So I've told all my friends, this time next year, I'll be talking to Nancy Grace. And you better believe that I'm going to sick Nancy Grace on you too. Just confess. Well, at this point, you're just confess. You'll spend a couple years in prison for manslaughter and you'll probably be released. The longer that you drag this out, you're going to end up dying in prison. Just confess to your crimes and I'll go away and I'll stop publicly talking about you. You'll go away and you'll just not exist in my life, but I need you to pay for what you did. You ruined my life. You know that. Just confess.
Do you still love her?
Yes, I do.
No teamwork.
Don't forget, we got that on tape.
Something strange is happening in Iceland, but you might be able to help. After a billionaire named Andy Ronson invited 9 individuals to one of his exclusive retreats, one of the guests was mysteriously found dead. Now here's what's interesting. One of the guests, Darby Hart, witnessed the death firsthand and believes that it was intentional. However, the other guests don't believe her, which leads the girl down a rabbit hole of evidence, clues, and difficult conversations in order for her to prove that this death was by no means an accident, but a murder. And Darby must use her skills to make her case before this killer takes another life. And if you want to join her for the journey, this series is now streaming on Hulu. Thanks to FX for sponsoring this video.
This Texas girl went missing recently. Her family took the search into their own hands. What her dad uncovered was heartbreaking. Idania Campos was a 21-year-old female from Texas. Her family started to worry when she didn't turn up for school on the 28th of November. It was out of character for her not to turn up at school, and her mum had last spoke to her at about 8:20 a.m. Her family decided to retrace her last steps and went to a neighborhood in Houston. They had no luck finding her, so they called the police. Her 19-year-old boyfriend joined in the search, and heartbreakingly later that day a discovery was made. At around 5:40 p.m, it's reported that her dad broke into her Honda. They opened the boot to the car and found her body. Her dad told news sources there was no way to save her, there was too much blood. She was pronounced dead at the scene and had signs of trauma to her face. Ariel Cruz, her boyfriend, or reportedly ex-boyfriend, was arrested and allegedly confessed to being involved. It's alleged that he may have killed her due to her breaking up with him. He's currently being held in jail.
We need to talk about Johnny Depp's portrayal of the Mad Hatter, because it is full of dark history Easter eggs that you may have missed. If you know of the character the Mad Hatter, then you may also know about the dark history of hatters. For 250 years, people that made hats were using a poisonous mercury-based solution that caused their bodies to fall apart and for them to slowly lose their minds, which I just did a whole episode on that and other deadly beauty and fashion trends that you should check out. When Johnny Depp got the role of the Hatter, he became obsessed with the dark history of hat making, and he wanted to include parts of that history in the character. And the biggest homage he pays to that history is with the orange hair. The mercury solution that hatters used to use was called carroting solution because it was so bright orange. They would sit in these poorly ventilated rooms all day, just inhaling the poisonous mercury, getting sicker and sicker. And Johnny Depp wanted to honor that. He wanted the skin to be pale and sickly. He wanted his teeth to look like they were decaying because that's what would happen to these people. And finally, and this is my favorite detail, he put a lot of details into the costume to make it look like he was a hat maker. Up here in his hat, there's tools to make hats. He has a ring that's a push pin, and on the other side he has this belt of thread so he could be sewing hats all day. Anyways, I have so much more on the dark history of hatting in this week's episode, and you're definitely going to want to check it out.
I was found dead in a cold room, and no one knows how I...
I killed 2 little boys when I was only 10 years old. My name is Mary Bell, and I was born in 1957 in England. I had a very difficult childhood. My mother was a prostitute, and my father was a known criminal at the time, but he was never present at home and never took care of me. On multiple occasions, my mother tried to kill me when I was just a child, and she made it seem like they were just simple accidents. On May 25th, 1968, I committed my first crime at the age of 10. While I was in an abandoned house with Martin Brown, who was 4 years old, and without any particular reason, I decided to kill him by suffocating him. 2 months later, on July 31st, 1968, I made my second victim with a friend of mine, a 3-year-old boy named Brian Howe. With my best friend, I strangled him and then mutilated his body with scissors. This murder was particularly atrocious according to investigators. On August 5th, 1968, I was arrested, and then I was sentenced to 12 years of detention for manslaughter due to my psychological state, and was released in 1980 at the age of 23 under a new identity. I am still alive at present, and am a mother.
This is the most dangerous book in the world. The book is called Al-Azif. It talks about black magic in the ancient civilizations that used to live on Earth millions of years ago before humans ever existed. And they were satanic civilizations, meaning that before humans, there were jinns living on Earth, which is mentioned in the Quran, that jinns used to live before Adam and Eve. This book tells you about those satanic civilizations, and what's even more scary and dangerous is that the book tells you how to communicate with these creatures, which is just disturbing. And it is known that the average age of the jinn is 5,000 years. All the copies of the Al-Azif in the world, and many of them translated in different languages, were burned completely, and there is only one copy of this book on Earth, and it's located in the Vatican Library. And nobody can reach this copy without a specific and secret permit. The author of the Al-Azif is Abdullah al-Adrad. He was a Yemeni poet and was born in 685, and passed away in 735. All the people around him called him the crazy poet or the crazy era man. And apparently he used the magic from the jinns he learned in the book in a very bad way, and he was then punished with a terrible punishment by the jinns. They sent a creature that cut off his private parts and took the rest of his body and immediately disappeared. So I don't know about you, but I never want to read this book.
This is the harrowing case of the deceased baby that was posted in the Mail. It was the 11th of May 1965 in Darwin, Australia. A postal worker named John Polishuk was expecting a normal day at work. Little did he know what he was about to find would haunt him for the rest of his days. An unclaimed parcel sat in the office, and this was not uncommon. However, this particular parcel had been sat there for 8 days, and something unnerving had started to happen. It had begun to smell quite bad, and liquid was seeping out of it. John decided to investigate and was horrified by what he found. Inside the package was a deceased newborn baby. Part of the child's umbilical cord was still attached. In a complete panic, John rang the police. An investigation began, but unfortunately it was frustratingly unproductive. Now, the package had come from Melbourne to Darwin. It was documented that a J.F. Barnes at 2 Woolridge Avenue, Mentone, Victoria, had posted the baby. However, the officers involved in investigating this crime found that the address didn't even exist. There was also seemingly no such person as J.F. Barnes in the area. The parcel was also addressed to someone who didn't seem to exist. An autopsy concluded that the child was killed at just a few hours old. Horrifically, they had been strangled. Tragically, the mystery of the baby in the Mail has still never been solved. After this woman vanished for 2 years, it was actually Google Street View that solved the mystery. Paulette Landrieu was 83 years old from Belgium. She was a mother of 4, and her family were understandably confused and heartbroken when she vanished. It was the 2nd of November 2020, and nothing of any significance had happened to explain her disappearance. She was living in Anden in Belgium, and police were stumped. Even after a really large-scale search, including helicopters with thermal cameras, she was still nowhere to be seen. They started working on a theory that maybe she had fallen into the local river, but after a search, nothing was found. The case went cold, and nobody seemed to have any idea what had happened to the well-loved pensioner. This was until one officer decided to try and trace her last steps. He decided to get a better idea of the geography of the local area by using Google Street View. As luck would have it, he actually came across images of Paulette. Cameras captured her crossing the road leading to one of her neighbours' houses. Luckily, Google Maps had captured several still images of Paulette. Police decided to search the scene and went to the neighbour's house that had been captured in the pictures. Paulette was found deceased lying on an embankment, presumably having fallen in a tragic accident. She was only meters away from her home. It isn't clear why police hadn't found her originally or searched that neighbour's house and why the neighbour hadn't seen her themselves. Thankfully though, her family do now have some closure on this case and she has been finally able to be laid to rest. This teenager from Wiltshire had no idea that breaking up with her boyfriend was going to cost her her life. Ellie Gould was a 17-year-old student at a school in Chippenham. She was a bright girl and planned to soon go to university. It was May 2019 and Ellie had ended her relationship with 17-year-old Thomas Griffiths. Thomas refused to accept the fact that Ellie no longer wanted to be with him and decided to do the unthinkable. On the 3rd of May, Thomas emailed his teachers to say that he would not be in school that day and got the bus back home. He then took his mum's car and drove to Ellie's home where he would launch a vicious attack. He stabbed her at least 13 times in the face and the neck, and then tried to stage the scene so that it looked like a self-unaliving. He put her hand around the handle of the knife to make it look like she'd done it of her own accord. Now in the struggle, as you can see from this harrowing image, Ellie had desperately tried to fight for her life. She had scratched Thomas's face in a desperate attempt to defend herself, which left him with marks all over his face. Thomas knew that he needed to come up with a cover story. He messaged his friend on Snapchat to say that he'd been struggling mentally and scratching his own neck quite hard in order to account for his injuries. When Ellie's dad got home later that day after work, he had no idea what he was about to walk into. He found his daughter in the kitchen lying in a pool of her blood. Now, due to their recent breakup, Thomas was the obvious suspect and he was arrested. He pleaded guilty in court but got just 12 years in prison due to his age. Ellie's family is obviously understandably really upset by this. Since Ellie's death, her mum Carol has been campaigning to try and get tougher sentences for domestic murders.
This is Travis the chimp, one of the worst animal attacks ever recorded, explained. This is Travis the chimp, and he lived with Sandra and Jerome Harold since he was a young chimp, and was often treated like a member of the family, but one day something happened. He exhibited unusually aggressive behavior, which made the Harolds call their friend Nash for assistance. But when Nash arrived at the Harolds' home, Travis the chimp suddenly attacked her. And the attack was extremely gruesome. Travis the chimp targeted Nash's face and hands. It ripped off both of her eyelids and then proceeded to rip her nose clean off, blinding her and also severing several parts of her body and lacerating her face. Travis the chimp was then shot and killed by police who arrived at the scene. But Nash's injuries were so severe that she had to undergo a face transplant and lost both of her hands in an attempt to save her life. But miraculously, she would survive. I would show you pictures of the attack, but they're extremely gruesome and I probably can't show them on here. So instead, I will play the 911 call made by the Harolds as Nash was being attacked by Travis the chimp. And you can hear Travis the chimp in the video going absolutely crazy. This man knows what happens after death, and this is what he has to say.
Okay. All right. Let me go through the whole process of what happens when you die, and we'll cover those things in it. When you die, you become aware in another virtual reality. So your body dies and you wake up, sort of like we're no longer in Kansas. You're in a different place. And in order, that is called the transition reality and it's another virtual reality. You tend to have a little anxiety at that point, particularly if you come with fear, like, oh, is this hell or is this heaven? So there's some anxiety with it, or maybe it was a traumatic accident that you weren't planning to die, it just suddenly overcame you. But in any case, you will run into something, there'll be some strategy there to help you relax and let go of your past life. So it could be the light at the end of the tunnel, you know, all the things that the people who have the near-death experiences do. That's kind of the beginning of this pathway. Often there's the light and you get this intuition, that would be the larger conscious system sending you a message, move toward the light. So you do, and then as you do, you know, you find, you know, Aunt Susie and Uncle Fred, you know, there to greet you, and because they passed on 10 years earlier, and they're smiling and they're happy and they're obviously having a good time, so it couldn't be too bad there. So these things are done just to put you at ease, make you feel relaxed, and let go. Your previous life begins to fade immediately, just like dreams do. You wake up from a dream, the instant you wake up, it's perfectly clear. 30 seconds later, it's a little fuzzy. A minute later, it's a lot fuzzy. And 5 minutes later, what was that dream about? I only remember a couple of major things, but all the detail disappears. So that's the way your memory of the last life just begins to fade like a dream.
What kind of mother drives their 6-year-old child to the highest bridge they can find and then throws them off the edge? This kind. This is Gillian McCabe, and this is the murder of London McCabe. London was born in 2008 in Oregon to parents Gillian and Matt. In 2011, he was diagnosed with severe autism. He was described by his teacher as an animated, expressive little boy who was full of love. He loved to sing and make people laugh. London was the centre of his parents' world, but when Matt was diagnosed with MS, it all became a bit too much for Gillian, and in 2014, she began researching ways to kill her son. Prosecutors would later use her search history in her trial. On November 3rd, 2014, Gillian put London in the car, drove to Yaquina Bay Bridge in Newport, walked him to the edge, lifted him up, and threw him over the side. She then calmly walked back to the car, and as she heard her son's body hit the water, she dialed 911 and told them what she'd just done. Police had to then ring London's dad Matt and ask him to corroborate the story and make sure London wasn't with him. They then had to tell him that his son was missing, presumed dead, after being thrown off the edge of a bridge. Boats and divers were dispatched, and just a few hours later, London's lifeless body was pulled from the water. The most horrific thing is that the fall didn't kill London. It broke his bones, but what ultimately killed him was drowning. Gillian was arrested and charged with murder. Her internet history showed that she'd searched things like temporary insanity, insanity defence, and different ways to kill a child, such as stabbing or dropping from a 133-foot bridge, the exact height of the bridge that she dropped London from. Medical records showed that she'd admitted herself into hospital a couple of times, claiming that she was suffering from mental illness, but that she was given a clean bill of health both times and discharged. Prosecutors in Gillian's trial said that London's murder was carried out with much calculation and that she'd faked mental illness in the hopes of getting off with a lighter sentence. Gillian was found guilty and was sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years. In a statement from London's dad Matt, he said, "I can't say enough about this boy. He was my pride and joy. He was the centre of my world, and his loss leaves a hole in the centre of my universe. If you know an autistic individual, they need love too, probably more than you and I."
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
A murder plot concocted by a monstrous brother and sister. One shocking thing about this story is that these two were in an incestuous relationship, and they were about to be found out. Sarah had 6 children who she brought up thinking that their father was dead. In actual fact, their biological father was also their uncle, Brandon. The couple lived apart, but Brandon spent most of his time at the family home on the Shire Green estate in Sheffield, South Yorkshire. The family were already on the radar of social services from quite early on. when Sarah's brother Martin witnessed abuse from Brandon towards the two oldest children when they were just toddlers. As the family grew, they actually flew under the radar and weren't contacted by social services until 2018, when the two oldest boys were teenagers and they'd started to get in trouble at school and in the local community. These two were terrified that their sordid relationship would be revealed, and Sarah had even said to a friend that she'd rather see her children dead than in care. It was at this point that they came up with their monstrous plan. On May 2nd, 2019, all of the children were forced to swallow medications found around the home in an attempt to kill them. When this plan failed, the couple turned on the two oldest boys. Sarah strangled 14-year-old Blake with a dressing gown cord, while 13-year-old Tristan watched on in horror. Brandon then turned on Tristan and strangled him with his bare hands. As if that wasn't horrific enough, the couple then tied plastic bags around the boys' heads. Sarah then actually tried to drown one of the younger children in the bath, but this attempt failed. The plan had actually been to kill all 6 children, but for some reason Sarah had a change of heart and she ended up locking herself and the children in the bedroom. She then texted a friend to say that Brandon was trying to kill them all. The police were called and all 6 children were rushed to hospital, but tragically Blake and Tristan were pronounced dead. A murder investigation was launched and the couple were soon arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. They were both sentenced on November 12, 2019, and they both received life with a minimum of 35 years, meaning when they're eligible for parole, they'll be in their early 70s. The house where the murders took place in Sheffield has now been demolished, and a memorial to the 2 boys has been erected.
This is one of the most dangerous men in American history, James Bartholomew Husky. And let me tell you, this story is extremely disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. So this story starts all the way back in 2006 when Australian authorities informed the FBI about a group of CP traders that were operating on the dark web. When the FBI began investigating this group, they recovered a particular set of images and videos that were extremely graphic and disturbing. These videos showed a pedophile, a large man wearing a mask that obscured his face, abusing a young girl multiple times. And over the years, these images and videos had been multiplying, and as they multiplied, they got more and more graphic and disturbing. Investigators knew at that point that the only way this was going to end was the death of the child in the videos. So they knew that they had to act fast, crack this pedophile code, and figure out who the man in the mask was. But they really had no clues, no place where they could start their investigation. In the videos, the girl was named as Tara, which could have been a nickname. In the videos, the abuser either obscured his face using computer blurring, wore a mask, or made the child wear a mask. But eventually, investigators were able to look at the backgrounds of the videos. They used the bedding, paintings on the walls, and car interiors to lead them to their suspect. And that's what led them to James Bart Husky, a former tennis coach from Lafayette, Georgia, who was the man in the mask. After they arrested Husky, they searched his home and found the camera that he used to produce all this material. They were able to identify the rooms and the car interiors based on the decorations that they had seen in the content. And they managed to locate Tara and interview her and make sure that she was doing okay, which she was. Eventually, Thomas Husky pled guilty and was sentenced to 70 years in prison, so he will die in prison. But this case helped to shine a light on an international pedophile ring that Thomas was a part of. Apparently, this ring was worldwide, and the people who ran this ring ordered production of CP materials from all different countries across the planet. The pedophile ring even had their own bank account that they would pay other pedophiles to produce CP for them with. And they paid people to produce this content in all different sorts of countries like Germany, England, Canada, etc. The group was also very, very strict about its membership policies. For example, you had to pass tests to get in, and you were never allowed to chat or speak with any other member because if one member came down, they wouldn't allow anybody else to get caught in the process. But that means that yes, while they caught Thomas Husky, that still means that there are hundreds of other pedophiles associated with this website and this ring that were never brought to justice. And disturbingly, investigators on this case referred to the series of videos that Thomas produced as being the most popular CP series ever produced on the planet. Another traumatic element that Tara has to deal with as she grows up, the victim in this case. I think that for a guy like this, the death penalty would definitely be appropriate, but what do you guys think?
This might be the worst thing cops have happened to somebody in history. On May 7, 2008, Rachel Morningstar Hoffman, a 23-year-old American college graduate, was murdered by drug dealers Danilo Bradshaw and Andrea Green. She was acting as a police informant in a botched drug sting by the Tallahassee Police Department. Her body was recovered 2 days later near Perry, Florida. Rachel Hoffman was under drug court supervision for possession of 25 grams of cannabis, discovered during a traffic stop on February 22, 2007. And on April 17, 2008, the Tallahassee Police Department searched her apartment and uncovered another 151 grams of cannabis and 4 ecstasy pills. Rachel Hoffman faced a possible prison sentence if charged and convicted. Police attempted to persuade her to identify other marijuana dealers to avoid the charges. She refused. The police then pursued